YouTube, once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn here on the podcast. We're talking a little Auburn football here on a beautiful but hot Tuesday afternoon here in the Deep South, where college football is king. And on the plains of Auburn in East Alabama, the battle cry is War Eagle. On this channel, Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn, is always great to be an Auburn Tiger. Go ahead and get on in the comment section. We got a lot to talk about. It's going to be short, though. We're just going to talk just some ideas, okay? We're not going to get all profound and, all these deep analysis today. We're just going to talk about some ideas. I saw some things on social media today that actually intrigued me as it relates to some of Auburn's outcomes here over the last few years. Don't get me wrong. I think Gus is definitely on tap as to some of the reasons that some of these things have happened, because you are accountable for what you know. You're also accountable for what you don't know. And one of the things that I'm seeing now that I'm really looking at the recruiting classes, especially some of the higher tier recruiting classes, is I'm seeing some trends that Gus Malzahn is starting to get a little bit better at, to be honest with you. Now, Auburn has had some top, 10 recruiting classes, okay, which has been great. That's why they've been fairly competitive over the last few years. But one of the reasons why they have had some struggles, especially depth in certain positions, is the quality of the athletes in very key positions, okay? Now, offensive line, definitely. Not a lot of depth there. Linebackers, I think Auburn has kind of dropped the ball over the past few years as well. And it looks like Auburn is making some effort to actually fix this, okay? So when I'm looking at a recruiting class now, not only am I looking at the recruiting class ranking, I'm going through and looking at the quality of the recruiting class. We'll say, for example, the year prior for Auburn. Auburn didn't have a bad recruiting class, but what's happening is Auburn in a lot of schools that are not Georgia, that are not Alabama, that are not LSU, or any of the other top recruiting classes. They're very top heavy, okay? Like Auburn is very top heavy with recruits. They'll get some guys like Owen Papo, Bo Nix, and Cameron Kelly, all those 4 or 5-star guys up top, 4 or 5 of them. But then they will be sandwiched in with a lot of 89s, in the middle, and then tapering off with about 5 85 down to 82 guys, okay? So you have a highly rated recruiting class, but your quality is really not as profound as you would like to think, because you have the top heavy part of your recruiting class that are getting you those high rankings. But then when you look at the quality of the entire class, and then you look over at the average rating, you're looking at like 89 to 90. That's where the quality comes in, okay? So we look at an 8-5 Auburn team versus, matter of fact, there was a guy on social media that made somewhat of a very simple yet profound statement. He said 8-5 is good coaching, okay, but no recruiting. You're piecing that thing together. You're doing all you can to make it work out. Look at the 2016 season, a piece together season. Auburn did everything they could with what they have. A lot of people will argue me under the table and say that Auburn had a top-notch roster. Maybe the top 11, the starting 11 on both sides were good. But when injuries started to play a factor, that's when the season begins to fall apart. That's not coaching, that's recruiting. That's when Kerryon Johnson falls, or when Cameron Petway falls, you have nobody else. That's recruiting. And when you're talking about competing on a Power 5 level, it can't be a situation where you're 1 or 2 injuries away from, your season being in shambles. That's, low-end Power 5 football. That's that Troy State football. That's that UAB kind of football. Those teams don't have to compete with, the Alabamas and the Arkansas of the world. So they can recruit like that. Auburn can't afford to recruit like that. I would just go out. I would say that in the last 2 recruiting classes, Auburn has done a little bit better job of making their recruiting, at least on the bottom end, a little bit more heavy. The tape-off doesn't start as early as it used to, and it didn't have as many of those 85s and 82s and all those other guys. I would even say, even for the 2019 class, I like Cameron Brown, Derek Brown's brother, but those are guys moving forward that you just don't need to try to heavily recruit. You know what I'm saying? An 81, you have no room for an 81 average guy on your roster if you're a Power 5 team talking about competing for national championships. What you want is go over and look at Georgia's. I don't have I'm actually out on the road right now, but I don't have the diagram with me, but you can verify all of this. Georgia and Alabama and LSU have very top heavy recruiting classes, high 90s, and you scroll down the page, you don't see an 80 nothing. You don't see an 80 nothing until the bottom, somewhat the middle of the page, and you've already gone through a whole bunch of 5 stars and high-end 4 stars, and then that's when the tape-off starts, but even the tape-off is pretty good. Whereas Auburn is taping off at about 87% average, Georgia is taping off around 88, 89. And that's where their depth is coming in, because they're being able to recruit. When you start talking about the down part of your recruiting class, that's where you're factoring in your depth and developmental qualities of your recruits. Okay? So that's why when you look at Auburn, it's not so much, coaching plays a part. But just imagine if Auburn got some of these guys. Now, I don't think Auburn will ever, at least in the foreseeable future, be able to pound for pound be able to out-recruit LSU, Georgia, or Alabama. But winning some games, guys, they can start to close the gap. You talk about a 10-win season, 10-plus win season this year with the already very, very competitive recruiting class that is already happening at Auburn. Could happen. Auburn could have that top 5 recruiting class. And the way you have a top 5 recruiting class is it's all about the quality once you get past the top guys. Okay? Everybody in Power 5 football, at least in the SEC, your top guys, Auburn, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, some of your higher rated recruiting class teams, Texas A&M, everything is great. The first, 1 to 7 recruits, 5-star, high-end 5 stars, high-end 4 stars, all across the board. But what you want to look at for is how it tapers off. You know what I'm saying? How does it taper off? And the way it tapers off is, you think about it like this: you're only as strong as your weakest link. And if your bottom half is strong, then you're going to have a very, very solid and a very, very high-rated recruiting class, because you don't have any really top-heavy guys that's holding up the top, making up for your lack of talent down at the bottom end of your recruiting class. So that's why, in a way, outside of the coaching factors and things like that, that's why, in a way, Auburn has found their way into 8-5ville in a lot of cases. Yes, Gus, you can blame Gus. I'm all for it. I'm all for blaming Rhett Lashley or whoever you find that's convenient to blame as to Auburn's current state of affairs. But I guarantee you the biggest state of affair is inconsistencies in recruiting. And then you talk about attrition as well, where some of these guys don't pan out. Rock Thomas, one of the highest recruits in the last few years, didn't pan out. Kerryon Johnson, in my honest opinion, barely panned out. If Cameron Petway would have been on the up and up, we would have never saw Kerryon Johnson. It appeared that the coaching staff had wrote him off. But he got in and he made the most out of his opportunity. And he got the hell out of there. Okay. So here we are. 2019, a very, very solid recruiting class. Shows that Auburn is trending towards getting a little bit more smart in how they approach the recruiting process. You got to get it right. And you got to get the right kind of athletes for the, kind of program that you want to run. Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here on Podcast 4, Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. Love the SEC, love Auburn football. On this channel, it's always great to be an Auburn Tiger. Until the next time we can convene and talk about some sports, I am your Auburn conversationist, War